I, Blake Rogers, have known the three Nelson sisters since I was 10 years old, and at that time they were 8. Wilma, 10, Gail, and 12, Marcy. We lived on the same block and our parents were friends, so I talked to them often. Gail and Wilma were a joy. They were always upbeat, friendly, and very sweet, both similar in appearance to Amy Adams. Marcy was a witch. Although she was beautiful, eventually becoming a full-bodied version of Gal Gadot, and was already on her way to having a curvy female figure even at 12 years old, she was angry, spiteful, and self-centered. If her appearance reflected her personality and character, she would be a modern-day ugly duchess. Although I probably always had a crush on Gail, and sometimes Wilma, I never did anything in elementary school or even high school. I always had the feeling that they saw me more as a cousin or friend they could confide in rather than a potential romantic partner, and I was afraid that I would get shot. This fear was due in no small part to the way Marcy, aka the Ugly Duchess, treated me, always putting me down, calling me names, and sometimes even starting rumors about me. Once, when I complained to my mother about Marcy's behavior when I was 14, she said, "Maybe she likes you and wants your attention." Yes, that's right. The most beautiful, but most snake-like girl in our school, almost 2 years older than me, made my life unbearable because she liked me. Poor mother was delirious. For me, the time Marcy left for college was a happy time, but I could never muster up the courage to pursue Gail or Wilma romantically, as they seemed to continue to only see me as a friend. Perhaps the hardest thing I had to do my senior year of high school was ask Wilma to the prom. Wilma skipped a grade and was the youngest. I didn't have a steady girlfriend, and I didn't like anyone enough to spend the evening and the next day with them, so I didn't plan on going. Wilma had a relationship with a high school student named Humphrey, but he left her a week before the prom, after she had already bought her dress. She came to see me, sobbing, especially since she was elected to the prom court. Gail was prom queen. They were both very loved. If I had gotten my hands on Humphrey at that moment, I would have killed him with my bare hands. Not that that had anything to do with it, but I was the starting linebacker on our conference championship football team and was certainly physically capable of doing it. Trying my best to distract Wilma from crying, I said, "Look, I don't have a date for the prom. I would be delighted to accompany one of the special members of the court to the dance." Wilma immediately stopped crying. "Will you really do this for me?" "Oh, thank you so much, Blake." He kisses me on the cheek and then asks me about the time and activities. After she told me the color of her prom dress so I could buy a matching bodice, she kissed me on the cheek one more time and then hurried home with a smile on her face. Wilma and Gail both looked very good on prom night. I was proud to accompany Wilma, but at the same time was completely upset. I would have liked to rip her clothes off and make love to her in the middle of the dance floor, but neither that nor doing it in private was in my plans. While Wilma was her usual friendly self and treated me great, I could tell there was no romantic spark on her part. So by the time we returned from all the post-prom activities the next day, I only received hugs and kisses on the cheek. Luckily, the following weekend at an out-of-town baseball game, I ran into a sultry girl named Lizbeth, who had gone to the same elementary school as me and who was now a senior at the high school. She and I started talking. It was clear that there was a mutual attraction between us, and I almost missed the team bus. I was so engrossed in conversation with her. When I was about to run to catch the bus, she quickly wrote her phone number on my hand and said with a wink, "In case you want to call." Without going into too much detail, Lizbeth and I had a real sexual, although probably not very romantic, attraction to each other. She was experienced and ready, so I didn't have to go off to college as a 19-year-old virgin after a very hot summer. Marcy, Gail, and Wilma graduated from different colleges from each other and from me, and since their parents moved to another state, I almost never saw them again during my time in college. I had a very productive 4 years. I made the honor roll in mechanical engineering several times, had a great social life in a fraternity, including having sex a very reasonable number of times, and enjoyed playing football and baseball. While I had always been fit and strong, I had also matured physically in many ways, and had even grown 3 inches and gained 15 pounds of muscle and lost any semblance of plumpness on my face and torso. Luckily, my best job offer was in the big city where Gail and Wilma's parents now lived, and where everyone else, Gail, Wilma, and Marcy, were also based. I learned about this from my parents, who kept in touch with Nelson, and ended up at a party about 2 weeks after I started working. Wilma was there with her regular boyfriend, Marcy was there with her first husband, and Gail was there alone. After the first 20 minutes, it became obvious that Wilma and Gail were still mega sweet, friendly, cheerful. It was also clear that Marcy was still a total badass and her husband was henpecked, although there was no denying that Marcy was now as beautiful as a woman could be. What changed, however, was the way Gail looked at me. From the second we hugged in greeting, 2 things became clear. My old childhood and teenage crush on her was back with renewed vigor, and the way she looked at me was very different from the way we went to school together. Her sensual touches and glances when communicating with me were not just friendly. Just 2 months after her parents' party, Gail and I became lovers. Within 18 months of that party, we were married, at which point Marcy was with her second husband. Despite Marcy's presence, our wedding and reception were a true joy. The only fly in the ointment was that Marcy got drunk at the reception and quarreled with her husband. As at the reception, family life with Gail was wonderful, except for the forced interaction with Marcy, who I now called Evil Marcy, mostly only in my imagination, but sometimes in front of Gail. Despite how despicable I thought Evil Marcy was, both Gail and Wilma insisted on communicating with her and her husband or boyfriend at the moment. With their forgiving, friendly, and devoted personalities, both Gail and Wilma were oblivious to Marcy's many flaws, and they didn't like it when I criticized her. So to keep the peace, and since I loved Gail and loved Wilma, I stopped complaining about mean Marcy. Unfortunately, I think my lack of grievances related to Evil Marcy began to be interpreted by Gail and Wilma as a change in my attitude towards her, and that I actually liked her. They thought Marcy kept teasing me about being cute. Gail and I had been married 4 years when Wilma and her husband Jack celebrated their 5th anniversary. Gail, and presumably Marcy, although I couldn't believe it, wanted to do something nice for her, so they arranged a weekend trip. Although it wasn't my idea, Gail and Marcy rented a 4-bedroom house near the alpine and cross-country ski area, and their parents Nelson and their 3 daughters and spouses, Marcy was already with her 3rd husband, were planning to spend a long weekend there. Gail, Wilma, Jack, and parents. Nelsonov, we went on Thursday afternoon. Marcy and her husband Wilton were scheduled to leave on Friday morning, and since I had an urgent project that needed to be completed by Friday afternoon, I planned to drive separately from them and then ride home with Gail. On Friday at noon, I received a phone call that complicated my life. "Hello, dear." Gail began the conversation in her pleasant, friendly, loving voice. "How is the project going?" "So far, so good, darling. I'm running the final simulations on the computer now, and if there are no problems, I can leave at 2:30 or 3 hours planned," I replied. "This is great. I can't wait to see you," she sang. However, there is a slight complication. Wilton slipped on the ice this morning and won't be able to go, but Marcy is dying to come, and he has no problem with her coming without him, so she needs a ride. Why can't she drive the car herself? There's a forecast for snow, and she doesn't have a 4-wheel drive like your Subaru, and she's afraid to drive in the snow alone anyway. In fact, she and Wilton were planning to delay their departure and asked to be with you even before he slipped. Please, please, please be kind and bring Marcy here. Her house is on your way," Gail pleaded. With a sigh, I said, "Okay, tell her that. I'll pick her up at 3 o'clock. After a series of squeals, thanks, and promises of sexual nirvana, Gail ended the call. I sighed and went back to work. It was snowing quite heavily when I picked Marcy up at 2:58. I wasn't too worried because my Subaru Outback has gotten me through a lot of tough situations. In her typical haughty manner, Marcy ordered, rather than asked me to carry her suitcase and cross-country skis to the car, which I reluctantly did, while she struggled to the passenger door in a short skirt and 3-inch heels. Who the hell wears a short skirt and heels to go to the ski slopes in winter? I asked myself rhetorically. About an hour into the drive, Marcy began an alarming conversation. So tell me, Blake, why didn't you always like me? I decided to be honest. Because you're evil, Marcy. You always look for the worst in people. You took every chance you got growing up to abuse me, and you've changed damn little, as evidenced by the fact that you're already on your 3rd husband before you're even born. 30. Well, if you weren't so straightforward, I might have treated you better, but I just liked tugging at your chain since I knew you had a crush on my little sisters. She laughed devilishly. So, just because I liked Gail and Wilma, that made me fair game to be pursued. I tried to make you a man, not the Boy Scout you were. Look, there's nothing wrong with you, so I must have helped in some way. You didn't help me at all. I became who I am, despite your low blows and meanness. I growled. We continued to fight for the next half hour as the snow continued to accumulate. I didn't try to hit her, and she didn't seem at all alarmed by my comments. Then she said something amazing. Well, maybe if you showed me a little more attention instead of worshiping the shrines of my sweet sisters, I would be kinder to you. At that moment, she folded her hands on her chest and looked sternly forward. I didn't really have an answer to this. It overwhelmed me. In any case, the snow now required all my attention. After at least 20 minutes of silence, we reached the intersection of the main highway we had been traveling on and the rural road we would take for the rest of our journey to our rental house and ski area. Due to the weather, it took us 50 minutes longer than usual to get to this place. Despite how capable my car was, I had no desire to cross a country road in these conditions, especially since it was already dark, but I was determined to get home, if only to escape evil Marcy and get my sexy award from Gail. But the decision was made without me. At the intersection, there was a state car with flashing lights, and there was a closed gate at the entrance to the rural road, also with flashing yellow and red lights. I got out of the car and talked to the road worker. He informed me that there had been an avalanche on one particularly winding section of the road, and that the road was closed. You'll need a snowmobile to get through, he stated firmly. We can clear the road by tomorrow afternoon if the snow stops, which should happen within the next hour, he concluded. Is there somewhere to stay here? There's a small motel about a mile from here. If I were you, I would get there as soon as possible, he replied. I thanked him and returned to the car. I broke the bad news to Marcy. Contrary to what I expected and her character, she took the news calmly and did not even blame me. When we got to the motel, Marcy insisted on going to the office with me. There's only one number left. I wanted to forget about it and try the next motel, which was supposedly about 2 miles further, but Marcy snapped, "We'll take it," and put down her credit card. Without making a scene, I tried to talk her out of it, but she was persistent, and at some point she growled, "If you're so weak that you don't think you can keep your hands off me, then go and get me tomorrow. There's a grocery store next door that I'm sure has some wine in it, and I'll be fine." Her arrogance, her belief that I couldn't resist her despite her evil nature, plus the idea that Gail, Wilma, and the parents Nelson, Av would be upset if I left her here alone. At least they made me ask the owner, "Do you have a cot I can take?" "No, sorry. All the folding beds have already been taken apart, but this room has a double bed," replied the owner. I sighed, took one of the 2 keys he had placed on the counter, opened the door for evil Marcy, and we hurried back to the car. Our number was the last one. I parked where I thought we could easily get out the next day, even if the lot was filled up. I carried our suitcases to the room. "I need to change into something more suitable for this weather," Marcy sang as soon as we entered the room and turned on the heating. "Good idea," I said calmly, although I wanted to say, "Why the hell did you put on that outfit?" She started changing clothes right in the main room. "Can't you keep some decency and at least go to the bathroom to change?" I asked sarcastically. "Okay, you straightforward weakling." She smiled maliciously, picking up her ski pants and sweater and dragging in the bathroom. "There's a nice separate heater in here," she called out as I heard the fan start up before the door closed. After Marcy got dressed and I got what I needed out of my suitcase, we walked into the next building, luckily with boots on, since we had to wade through at least 2 feet of snow to a small grocery store. "You buy food? I'll bring wine," Marcy snapped. "Yes, boss," I replied sarcastically. She just smiled. I took and paid for the food, enough for dinner, breakfast, and lots of snacks. Marcy did buy wine, too many bottles, in my humble opinion. When we got to the room, Marcy called Gail and Wilma to tell them the news. I also talked to them. After I spoke with them and exchanged kind words with Gail and she expressed sympathy for our plight, Marcy returned to the phone. Her last words, followed by an evil laugh, were, "Don't worry, Gail. I won't ruin your husband for you, even if we have to sleep in the only bed available in this flea motel." "Why did you say that, bitch?" I growled. To calm her down, Marcy chuckled evilly. Surprisingly, Marcy was pleasant at dinner. I'm not much of a wine drinker and rarely love the taste of it, but there was something really good about the particular Pinot Noir she chose. Marcy also let me watch whatever I wanted on TV and kept filling my glass with wine. I had only been drunk twice in my life before, but I didn't care if I got drunk now because it might make time go by faster. Around 10 p.m., Marcy said, "You know that I didn't have any exercise today, and I have to train every day to stay in good shape. Let's practice so that dinner can be digested better," she giggled. "This motel doesn't have a gym," I answered calmly. "Just walking in the snow for 45 minutes will be great exercise," she grinned. "Come on, be an athlete. Let's go." We put on our winter clothes and boots and actually walked up and down the deserted highway for about 50 minutes. Even though my legs were much longer than Marcy's, I had to really puff to keep up with her. It's no wonder she had such a toned body if she trained so intensely all the time. I really felt good when we got back. A little tired, as sloshing through 2 feet of snow can be tiring, but under the influence of the wine and the walk, I was calm. We finished off a bottle of wine, then each showered, dressed in somewhat skimpy but appropriate clothes for bed, and crawled under the covers. I made a big impression on Marcy, laying on one side of the bed and warming it up while she showered, and since she was actually polite and asked if she could take the side I warmed up, I said, "Yes," and she responded with a giggle of, "Thanks." I think she giggled more that night than in all the other years I've known her combined. The combination of the sound of the wind blowing through the motel room windows, our strenuous walk, and the wine caused me to fall asleep. At a safe distance from Marcy, shortly after my head hit the pillow. After some time, I found myself in the middle of one of the most beautiful and realistic dreams of my life. I had sex with Gail. I swear that not only was the feeling realistic, but the accompanying sounds were there too. And suddenly I realized that I was not in a realistic dream, but in reality. Obviously, there was no way to stop at this point. I realized that I had just had sex with my evil sister-in-law. I really wanted to feel bad about this. I knew that he had to get out of this situation as gracefully as possible. Maybe she won't remember now in her sleep. I tried to deceive myself. Within seconds, she was giving me oral pleasure as if it were the last lollipop in the world. I felt her grab the blankets and cover us, bury herself in my chest, and I remember thinking that I should feel guilty and that I should somehow make up for this the next day. But at that moment, my mind was too full of endorphins to do anything other than sigh and pull her closer to me. Then I quickly fell asleep. When I woke up the next morning, the first thing I saw was a naked Marcy coming out of the bathroom, drying herself off, no doubt straight from her shower. I've seen her in a bikini twice already, and both times my spontaneous thoughts really bothered me. But completely naked, she was even sexier. She looked like a goddess. "Wake up, stallion," she giggled. "It's already more than 10 o'clock and the checkout time is noon. We need to have breakfast before we hit the highway and hope the road to the house is clear." While my brain was waking up, I thought, what? Did we really sleep twice last night? Apparently, I was looking at her naked, goddess-like body, thinking, because she broke into a devilish grin and then giggled. Judging by the expression on your face, it looks like you want a snack on me. Then, without further ado, she stood up and walked closer. I lay on the bed, naked, staring at the ceiling, my mind blown. When Marcy came out of the bathroom, I went and took a shower and then got dressed. While we ate breakfast in our room, Marcy carried on the conversation as if we hadn't had sex 3 times in the last 10 hours or cheated on our spouses. My mind had a hard time coping with it. We took another walk in the snow, repacked our suitcases, and it was already 11:51, so we got into the car and headed back to the road leading to the rental house. When we reached the country road, the gate was open, but there was a sign on it that said 4WD vehicles only. We reached home in about 45 minutes without any problems and were warmly greeted by all the relatives. That day, we split into 2 groups. Parents, Nelsonov, Wilma, and Jack were skiing. Gail, Marcy, and I were cross-country skiing. We met in the house before dark, and the 3 girls. Nelson, we prepared a wonderful dinner, and we drank to our anniversary, Wilma and Jack. Marcy behaved towards me the same way she always did. I had no fear about this, and the feeling of guilt had not yet overtaken me. I slept badly. A feeling of guilt and melancholy began to take over me. Although I was not responsible for the first round, I was responsible for the last 2. I felt like a jerk, because I was. The rest of the anniversary weekend, Wilma Jack passed as planned. The only fly in the ointment was that Marcy was coming back with Gail and me. In fact, I was worrying in vain that Marcy might say something frank. This did not happen. The 2 sisters chatted innocently all the way. I was lost, wondering what the hell I could do to make it up to Gail and how to avoid contact with Marcy in the future. The next couple of times I saw evil Marcy. She looked no different from the usual one next to me and, as far as I could tell, didn't even hint at what happened in room 15 of the motel. The first signs of spring appeared when, about 10 weeks after the infamous ski trip, Marcy called me at the office first. "Hi, this is your favorite sex toy." She started the conversation so terribly awkwardly. "What do you want, Marcy?" I answered calmly after some delay. "Oh, so it's me, your favorite fuck toy?" She giggled. "Yes, I just saw your name on the caller ID," I replied senselessly. "You're no fun. Anyway, I have good news for you. Should I come to your office? Do you want to meet in the park, or do you want to take me to lunch? Can't you tell me on the phone?" Never. One of these 3 options. After some delay, I answered by looking at my schedule. "Okay, how about tomorrow afternoon after 1:30 near the carousel in Grand Park? See you there at 2 o'clock in the afternoon." She grinned and turned off the connection. Luckily, I was busy enough that I wasn't focused on what she might want, so I didn't have any anxiety until the next day. I reached Grand Park at 2:02 a.m. and easily found her sitting on a nearby bench. I knew I wasn't going to like what I was about to hear when she stood up with a big smile on her face and kissed me on the lips. We sat down, she chatted a little about trifles, and then got down to business. 2 pieces of good news, Blake. First of all, I filed for divorce from Wilton. She chuckled. "Why is this good news?" I asked carefully. "Because he'll be out of the picture before the belly comes in and won't get in the way of me raising our son." She grinned like a bushel full of possums. "What can I say?" I choked. "Yes, you really did your job at the motel, had sex with me 3 times during my fertile period, and now I'm pregnant. Great job." After a long pause where I stared at her, trying to determine whether she was gloating or whether she was serious, I finally stammered, "Aren't you serious?" "Of course I'm serious. I told you then that I was in my fertile period and I was defenseless." She grinned. I didn't believe her, but considering how shocked I was at the time, if she said anything, it might well have fallen on deaf ears. However, it explained why she had shut her pussy up after our 3rd fuck. "How do you know it's not Wilton?" I hesitated. "That's for sure. I just had the IUD removed before our trip. I didn't let Wilton fuck me for 2 weeks after I got back, using the excuse that I didn't want him to hurt his back after he slipped and fell. I am estimated to be 10 weeks pregnant, and our relationship was 10 weeks ago, and, drumroll, I just took a DNA test and it's not Wilton, and the only person I've had sex with other than him in the last 6 months is you. Aren't you excited? She beamed. I put my head in my hands and almost cried. Marcy kissed the back of my head and said, "Don't be a wimp, Blake. I'm going to name our son William Blake Nelson, going back to my maiden name. I'm not going to tell anyone but him when he turns 21. I don't expect any financial commitment. Just teach him how to throw a baseball and stuff like that. Just be friendly and compassionate. That's not too much of an expectation, is it? Why did you set me up, Marcy? Why did you choose me to be the father of your child? With your looks, despite your evil nature, you could choose almost any guy in the world," I groaned. "Stop whining," she grinned. "You are a good candidate. You have the right combination of looks, intelligence, and character to provide good children." "What do you mean by children?" She grinned. "You never know what life holds in itself. Now answer my question. If I don't tell anyone that you are a father and don't ask for financial support, since I'm already rich, will you play ball with our son and take care of him?" I sighed. "As long as you don't tell anyone else, I'm not asking too much. It looks like you've been planning this for a long time, however." "How did you do that?" "I know, but you will never know," she laughed. "Now why don't you pull up your big boy pants and invite your baby's mommy over for a late lunch? In an ideal world, no one would ever know or even guess that William Blake Nelson was my son, besides him, when he is 21 years old. And my happy marriage with Gail would be forever, and evil Marcy would only be on the periphery of my life. However, as you know, the world is not ideal. Marcy was the hottest pregnant woman in history. It seemed as if she was born to be pregnant. She gained exactly the right amount of weight, had perfect muscle tone, was glowing, was never sick in the morning, and had a short, painless labor. She told the family that the father was some random guy she had a one-night stand with after she dumped Wilton. And given her story, it seems like everyone believed her. All family members seemed willing to help. I didn't have to interact much with Marcy during the first 6 months of her pregnancy, which was fine with me, both because I didn't like her personality and because I hated the lustful reaction of my nether regions around her. At the beginning of her last trimester, the situation changed. Shortly after she was 7 months pregnant, Marcy talked Gail into inviting me to a Lemaze class with her. And Gail, being the wonderful devoted sister she is, talked me into doing it. It was so damn painful to be around Marcy during Lemaze class, while she put on her pants and absorbed every bit of information she could about the birthing process and parenthood. All the other men in Lemaze's class were drooling at her, especially since she insisted on wearing provocative clothes. I spent most of the class trying to hide my boner. Marcy was not rude to me at this time, but she enjoyed teasing me and kissed my flushed face, saying, "I'm so happy that my child's natural father is with me." Since I was her coach, I went with her to the maternity ward. Fortunately, I did not have to watch the birth process itself, but I was moved when little William Blake Nelson laid in his mother's arms, and the realization that he was mine hit me like a baseball bat to the forehead. Of course, Gail, Wilma, and parents. Nelsonov were also at the hospital and everything went well with the birth, so they actually got to see mom and baby within 2 hours of him being born, while I went to the chapel and cried. Eventually, I started visiting William at least once a week, and when he was little, at least twice. I liked being with him. However, it bothered me that every time I visited him, Marcy would hug and kiss me tightly, which would cause an unwanted spontaneous reaction in my crotch. Surprisingly, my own mother unknowingly caused my death. I haven't seen any reason to mention this before, but my irises are a very unusual color. They are gray, and less than 1% of the population in the United States has gray eyes. I also have light red hair, which is the least common shade of blonde. My parents were visiting along with the whole clan Nelsonov at my home with Gail one Sunday. I was pretending to be a tickle monster while chasing 20-month-old William when he ran up to my mother and squeezed her legs, while he squealed with delight trying to get away from me. She looked him closely in the face and blurted out, "Blake, he looks exactly the same as you at this age, especially his eyes and hair. He could be your clone. Luckily, I got to William and started tickling him right after that statement. So I thought it might have been lost in his squealing and laughing. However, later that day, I saw Gail holding William while she and Wilma seemed to be looking straight into his face and not smiling. That was a bad sign. A little over 3 weeks after my mother's statement, when I returned home from work, I found Gail crying, sitting at the kitchen table with some papers in front of her and an open FedEx envelope. "What's the matter, dear?" I asked, touching her shoulder. She jerked her shoulder away from my touch and handed me one of the pieces of paper that lay in front of her. It was on DNA lab letterhead, and after some illegibility, in the middle of the page it said in bold letters, "Specimen A and Specimen B are closely related. Most likely Specimen A is the biological father of Specimen B." And with that single sentence, my happy marriage to Gail Rogers, née Nelson, collapsed. Of course, the whole marriage didn't really end in 1 day or even in 6 months, but that's when it died on the vine. I tried to salvage it, but despite Gail's loving and usually forgiving nature, it was too much of an insult for her. Marcy even did the first selfless act I've ever seen in her life and tried to take all the blame on herself. It didn't work. Within a year, I received my documents after agreeing to split the assets 70-30 in Gail's favor, in an attempt to ease my conscience. Shortly after my divorce, I moved to a city 500 miles away. While the main purpose of the move was to get away from the family, Nelsonove, and the crushing memories of my fall from grace, serendipitously, I also got a better job as a mechanical engineer overseeing some complex projects. Even with only 30% of my family assets, with the increased income from my new job, I easily got a mortgage on a nice 3-bedroom house in a nearby suburb of the big city I was working in. On the second Saturday, in my new home, there was a knock on my door around noon. I didn't really have a chance to get to know my new neighbors because I was working a lot, so I was very surprised that someone knocked on my door. I opened it and saw Marcy holding almost 3-year-old William. He shouted, "Daddy," and practically rushed at me. I caught him and showered him with kisses as I entered the house. Marcy followed us. I played with William while Marcy and I chatted about nothing in particular except what concerned William. I mouthed to Marcy, "Why are you here?" She mouthed, "We'll talk when William goes to bed." 2.5 hours passed when I put William to bed in the new double bed I bought for the guest room. When we got back to the living room, the first thing Marcy did was slap me. I was about to ask what it was about, but she answered before I could. "Did you even think about your child before you ran away with your tail between your legs? And why didn't you tell me about your plans, bastard?" she growled, raising her hand to hit me again. I grabbed her wrist. I needed to start all over again. "I didn't think you'd ever leave your family and your real estate business, and we don't like each other enough for me to ask you to move," I replied quietly. "You're so stupid. You want everything written out for you in big red letters. I'm shocked how you can live your life," she screamed, but not loud enough to wake William. "Don't you know that I love you?" were her last words before throwing herself at me and bursting into tears. I was shocked. I instinctively hugged her. When she finally stopped crying, she pulled away, walked into the living room and sat down, crossing her arms over her chest. I sat down next to her. "I regret my outburst. I know you think I'm evil, Marcy, and I didn't plan on taking it out on you when I came here. I've already cashed out my real estate business. I came to force you to accept one of 2 offers," she said sternly. "Okay, I'm listening. First, I'm moving in with you and we're raising William together. If you find that you can't stand me, you can kick me out after a 6-month trial period, and you don't have to think about marrying me no matter what." Then she took a deep breath and continued. "Second, I'll move into an apartment nearby and sue you for child support, but you'll still have to be in William's life." Then Marcy turned her head and fixed me with a steely gaze. We both stared without blinking for a very long time. I learned my lesson. She moved in, and 6 weeks later she announced that she was, surprise, pregnant again. This was 7 years ago. Marcy and I have been married for 6 years. She goes through periods of bitchiness, but motherhood has really changed her for the better. Now I really like her a lot and I love my boy and girl to death. Amazingly, I'm now convinced that she really loves me and I might really love her too. I don't want to overanalyze my feelings because I'm very happy with the current situation and don't want to rock the boat. He has been friends with 3 sisters since childhood. He likes 2, but considers one to be evil. Over time, he marries one of those he liked. They are going to a party in the mountains with the whole family on the occasion of one of their sisters' anniversary. His wife asks him to take his evil sister to this party since her husband injured his back and she is afraid to drive in the snow. An avalanche hits the road and they get stuck in the same motel room. She fucks him in his sleep, then twice more in reality. She divorces her husband and gives birth to a son from him. She does not claim his life, but asks to be present in her son's life. At a family party, his mother recognizes the child's features as her son. Her suspicion was heard, and his wife did a DNA test. They are getting divorced. He starts his life anew, and she appears on his doorstep. She tells him that she loves him and wants to try to live together. Soon, he gives birth to a daughter. 4 of 5. Subscribe to our channel so that your second chaff doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one.